Hi, hello, my name is Gomer Joseph. I hope you've all been having a great day so far. Welcome back to another True Crime Tuesdays video. If you are new, I welcome you. Today I'll be discussing a requested case of the tragic case of Dylan Redwine. As I researched this case, I was angered and devastated to find out that Dylan lost his life by the hands of someone that he should have been able to trust the most. Now, I encourage you all to do your own research with this case and not to just look at my video for all of the information. Here we go. Dylan Redwine was born on February 6 of 1999 in Colorado to parents Elaine Hatfield and Mark Redwine. And I do know that Dylan had an older brother named Corey. Dylan was described as someone who was joyful. He was known to always be texting. He was also known to be forgiving. Dylan didn't like seeing others upset, and he enjoyed hanging out with friends and was very vibrant. Eventually, Dylan's parents would divorce, and his mother, Elaine, would have full custody of him. As for Dylan's father, Mark, there would be times where he would, of course, have to go to his father for visitation. According to Elaine, Dylan never really liked visiting his father's place since it was pretty much like away from everyone and everything. On November 18th of 2012, Dylan is 13 years old at this point, and he goes to his father's house for one of those court-ordered visitations. Now, Dylan had this court order to go ahead and spend Thanksgiving with his father, and that night, Dylan wanted to visit his friend, but his father, Mark, wouldn't allow it. Sometime during that day, the two of them went to a local Walmart and left once Mark got what he needed to get at the store. On November 19th of 2012, which was the next day, according to Mark arrives home after running errands, and he claims that he noticed the TV was on. Afterwards, Mark claimed that he took a nap for an hour, but then, once he woke up, he still didn't see Dylan around the house at all. Mark claimed that he started looking for Dylan, then stated how Dylan's friends, who he made plans to visit, haven't heard from him either. Since Mark states that Dylan was nowhere to be found, he decides to go ahead and tell Elaine, Dylan's mother, that Dylan is pretty much missing. Not only does he state that Dylan is missing, but he asks her if she heard anything from their son. What Elaine states is that at that moment, she believed that her ex-husband Mark had something to do with their son going missing. Now, Elaine believes that Mark had something to do with Dylan's disappearance, but since that is the case, Mark is not, gonna go ahead and take accountability for that, and he states that he had nothing to do with their son going missing. At that time, Mark would go on to claim that he does not believe that Dylan ran away, because what Mark was saying was that Dylan would have no reason to run away in the first place. But here's the thing about, Mark's theory, and this is a bit out of order. Now, the family would eventually go on the Dr. Phil show, and Mark, after saying that there would be no reason for Dylan to run away, Mark is saying that it was possible that Dylan left the house on his own to go to his friend's house. But again, not long after Dylan is missing, of course, this is a missing child. He is 13 years old. The police are involved. But when the police have really no luck of locating Dylan, the FBI eventually get involved as well. At the end of the month, there was a vigil for Dylan, and Mark was actually present at the vigil. But the following day, the police would search the house, but I'll go ahead and go into detail about what the police found in the house later on in this video. Now, I'm not sure if this happened before the search or after the police searched the house, but Mark would take a polygraph test, And when he was on the Dr. Phil show, he pretty much stated that with the results, there was some sort of conflict. Mark stated that the polygraph test that he took concluded that he failed, but that it was also inconclusive. And again, like, I'm not the expert about how polygraphs work, but I mean, from what I always knew, it was either you pass, fail, or it's inconclusive. It can't just be a mixture of all three. But when he was on the Dr. Phil show, he refused to take the polygraph test that they had available to him. My apologies, he didn't feel well enough to take the test. On top of that, Corey, Dylan's older brother, Mark's older son, who actually had a strained relationship with Mark, believed that Mark was responsible for Dylan's disappearance as well. Corey pretty much stated that other than showing up to the vigil that one time, that Mark hadn't really done much at all to help with the search, and found that weird, especially since Mark was in Dylan's care Dylan was in Mark's care during the time of the disappearance. So if Mark doesn't confuse you enough, he goes on to point fingers at Elaine, pretty much accusing her of having something to do with Dylan's disappearance. The following year, in June 27th of 2013, Dylan's loved ones would receive the worst news that they could ever receive. Parts of Dylan's remains were found in the woods near a lake, which was pretty much 10 miles away from Mark's home. But it would take another 2 years until the hikers found the rest of Dylan's remains. When Mark received this news, the way that he responded was not saying that he was devastated. Mark wasn't expressing anger, but he expressed how he was blindsided. Now, here's the thing, like, I am not a parent, but it's already confusing enough that your son's remains were found miles away from your house. But when you hear that your son is no longer alive, like, I just don't see how you would use the term blindsided. On top of that, he didn't even attend his own son's memorial service. His reason was that he didn't want to go ahead and pretty much, like, cause a frenzy at the memorial service. But, like, yes, of course, not attending the memorial service of your late son, yeah, that doesn't make you look suspicious at all. Here's the thing. Though Elaine and most of Dylan's loved ones were devastated to hear of his loss, they weren't surprised that Dylan was no longer alive, because they felt like Mark did serious harm to him, which caused Elaine to file a wrongful death lawsuit against Mark, but it would be dismissed because of the statute of limitations. On top of that, it was first when, Dylan's remains were found and there was an autopsy done, it was first stated that it was undetermined as to how Dylan lost his life. Again, the police did search Mark's house a couple of months after Dylan's remains were found. And since this is no longer a missing persons investigation, they're now trying to focus on who or what took this child's life. On August 19th of 2015, the police saw Mark as a person of interest, not seeing Dylan's passing as undetermined, but certain that he lost his life because someone took it by a blunt force trauma to his head. On July 22nd of 2017, close to 5 years after Dylan went missing and also lost his life, Mark was arrested and charged for taking the life of his child. Now, remember earlier on I mentioned how the police did search the house, and what they found in the house was Dylan's blood, but At first, they stated that the blood was, wasn't circumstantial at the time. As I looked further into this case, I was trying to figure out why the trial was taking so long, and I found out that it was pretty much postponed 3 times. I can understand why it was, postponed the third time because, that was pretty much around the time of that horrid lockdown that we all went through. But I couldn't really figure out why it was postponed the first time. Praise God, the trial did begin in 2020, but there was a mistrial earlier the next year. So during the final trial, the defense tried to go ahead and make it seem like Dylan lost his life after an encounter with an animal in the woods. After hearing what the defense was trying to say, all that could come to me were the words of the late Aaliyah: "Dust yourself off and try again." But on October 8th of 2021, Mark was finally found guilty for taking the life of his child and was sentenced to 48 years in prison. Now, unless Mark lives an extremely long life, I doubt that we are going to see him on the streets anytime soon. Now, you might be wondering why Mark would take the life of his youngest child. Now, the prosecutors, they had a theory. They theorized that Mark was livid when Dylan discovered these nasty pictures that he found of Mark and then confronted Mark about those disgusting pictures. I feel like I would throw up if I actually vocalized what were in those pictures. So if you are curious about what those pictures are, I am just warning you about, how disturbing those photos are, if you actually do want to look them up. If Dylan were alive today, then he would be 24 years old now. He had so much ahead of him, but his own wicked father took his life over nothing. Mark took a son away from his mother and took someone's younger brother away from him. But by the grace of God, he gets to live with what he did to Dylan and Dylan's loved ones for the rest of his life. Not only will Mark be facing prison time for many years, but if he does not repent of his sins and trust in Jesus Christ alone to save him, then he will be facing punishment for all of eternity. After losing Dylan for over 10 years, his loved ones still miss him dearly. I pray that God would comfort Dylan's loved ones and that they would seek God in their mourning. I thank you all for taking the time in your day to watch this video. If you did like this video, please feel free to hit the like button. If you have any thoughts on this case, please leave your thoughts in the comment section below. If you'd like to see more videos from me, please feel free to subscribe and click the bell to be notified about the next video. If there is a certain true crime case that you would like me to cover, go ahead and let me know. I will see y'all for next True Crime Tuesdays, and I will talk to y'all later.